Passionate, authentic, northern, and all the other words. Okay, and I know you're all full of chocolate buns, so you're feeling quite heavy. But first of all, I'm delighted to be here. I had some train problems. Anyone who follows me on Twitter will know that I was whinging about Northern Rail and thought I might not get here, but I am here, and I'm delighted to be here. I've been following the tweets of the day as well, and I've seen the big themes of the day. What I would like to talk to you a little bit about is my own journey in the sector. I think a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about is probably making it more personal, but maybe tying into some of the themes of future and what I hope for the work that I do and the work that you all do. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. Delighted. You'll see that I'm the founder of a charity called Reclaim. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And then I've started doing some work on a programme called Roots, which is all about Brexit. So we're going to end on Brexit, which you'll be delighted with. Sorry. Okay. So this woman here is my absolute hero. She is? Angela Davis. Okay. So the reason I'm starting with her is because I believe that we are in radical times. And right now we need radical voices. And when I was 14 years old, I had a quite memorable parents' evening in my Catholic all-girls school in Bradford, where Sister Margaret told my parents that even though I was on track, I needed to realise that I was in a school in Bradford and was not a revolutionary in the Black Panther Party. And there was no need to be radical all the time and no need to be disruptive. And my parents were so proud of me that night, you know. But I almost feel, as the country falls apart, that my time has come. So I believe this is time for us to be more radical and to stop talking about being radical and to be more disruptive and actually to not leave leadership to people who don't have the values that we might need going forward in the country. So, I don't know how many Nigerians are in the room. Hands up if you are Nigerian. Yes, hello. There's always one. The story I'm going to talk about is my own story because as I've been a CEO for 11 years, what I've realised more and more is that founders' stories are always bound up with their own selves, and you often create the organisation that you needed. And I was the firstborn of an aspiring Nigerian family. And what this means, for those who might have seen Lion King, is the bit where they hold up, you know, the baby lion cub. That was my father and me every single day. I grew up in a highly radical house. My dad, from the age of 3 and 4, would talk to me about he always wanted me to be the first Nigerian or the first black something. So I was going to be the first black Bank of England governor. I was going to be the first black person to fly a plane for British Airways. I was going to be the first black Prime Minister of Britain. Still might happen, frankly. But I was always going to be the first black something. I was raised believing that I had leadership abilities. The fact that I went to a state school in Bradford, the fact that Bradford was at the bottom of the league tables, the fact that there were racial and religious riots going on, the fact that we lived on the next road to Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, none of that mattered. In our house, they were raising a young leader. And the reason why this is important is because I did go to a school at the bottom of the league tables, and Bradford was at the bottom of all of the cities. And so it was hard to be a young person with ability and things to say when you're from a hugely stigmatised area. And all I was ever told was, you know, you're bright, you need to go to London. That's all I was ever told. You need to get out of here. You need to go somewhere else. And I always felt very, very conflicted about that because I love where I'm from. You heard them say that I'm a professional northerner. And this idea that if you're from somewhere that is very poor or there aren't many opportunities, you're encouraged to leave is something that I've always found very, very troubling. So there was always a disconnect between the leader that I was brought up at home to believe and the opportunities that were available. And I went on to be a teacher. And my first year of teaching, I lived in a very exclusive boarding school called Cheetham School of Music, a beautiful school like Hogwarts in Manchester. And I was a house mom there. And I know, an unlikely house mom. It was a telephone interview, which I think played a part. It's true. And I lived there, and the kids would wake up in the morning, and they'd be tuning their violins, and it was like heaven. It was gorgeous. And the young people were just gorgeous young people, really polite and well-mannered and clever and funny. And then, after a year in that school, I moved 3 miles down the road and went to work at a high school in Moss Side in Manchester. And I stayed there for 7 years, and I loved that school. And those schools were 3 miles apart. And this is what started me off on my whole social justice about young people. because the expected outcomes for those young people from Chets were up here, and then I went to work in Moss Side, and all of a sudden, if you could keep them out of a gang, you'd done well. And I was like, this is nonsense. These young people are just as bright and just as clever, but have no knowledge or understanding that there's, Hogwarts down the road. Those two young people never met each other. They didn't inhabit each other's worlds, but were just as talented and capable as each other. So after 7 years of teaching, I left teaching and decided that I wanted to set up a charity called Reclaim. But just before that happened, and this is where the personal collides with the professional, doing really well, hugely successful as a teacher, on track to be a head teacher. And just before my 30th birthday, had some headaches, had some scans, and I got a letter sent through the day after my 30th birthday. Complete shock. And it said that I had multiple sclerosis. And this just completely, silence in the room. That's how it was in my family home as well. And all of a sudden, someone who'd been on track to be, to succeed and to do all these different things with their life and to be a social change pioneer and to go out and change the world, all of a sudden, that was threatened. And for me, this was what really shaped the way that I feel about myself and about leadership and also about the sector. Because what changed for me was the way people looked at me, the way people thought that the capabilities that people thought I had. Rather than people looking at me as a powerful, intelligent woman, people used to put their heads on one side a little bit. Isn't she brave? Oh, she's doing really well. I'm like, I'm still the same person I was a week ago. All of a sudden, when I interacted with charities, even MS charities, and there might be some here, they wanted me to be a case study. And I'm stood there thinking, I want to be the chief exec of this charity. No one is going to be a more powerful, passionate CEO of the MS Society than I'm going to be. Why do you want to make me a case study? I'm more than that. And just watching how you can be reduced down once you are someone who is deemed to be other. I became a passive beneficiary. I don't want to be a passive beneficiary. I want to play an active role. And so that was what really made me realise that when I ran a charity, I was never going to have the young people who were in my charity feeling that they could not play a part, that they could not be powerful, they could not be passionate, they could not be active. Me having MS is just a very annoying element of me, but it's still a powerful part of me and it gives me my fire. And I have a big problem with the fact that so many people are left outside of rooms or they are encouraged to play a different, lesser role rather than leadership roles. So there I am at 30 with MS about to start a charity. And the charity I started was called Reclaim. And Reclaim was about two things. One thing was the founder story. It's about me reclaiming me and me saying I can still be powerful and I can still be passionate. But the main part of Reclaim was all about finding young people who were from unfancied areas who wanted to go on and create change in their areas. Young people from Moss Side we started off who had something to say, and not just the young people who get to go into the youth councils, not just top set young people, because actually often the young people who feel most passionately about change are those who are a little bit further down, who don't get picked for all the opportunities. I had a head teacher in one of my schools who referred to the children who weren't gifted and talented and who weren't in the special needs groups, and she referred to them as the grey kids in the middle. And I started a charity for the grey kids in the middle from disadvantaged areas. And it was about, what do you want to happen in your lives? And when I worked at the boarding school, every Wednesday afternoon, all the young people gathered together and they did something called critical thinking. And they sat with their housemasters and they talked about the burning issues of the day, whether that be war or morality or philosophy or whatever. Had cups of coffee, discussed things. They were encouraged to think and reflect and challenge. And then when I went into the state sector, critical thinking, not so much on the curriculum. The young people were taught to consume and to accept and told what to do. So Reclaim, we started a charity that was about encouraging young people to think critically, for them to understand that yes, they are from disadvantaged areas, but to start thinking about why, to understand the politics and the economic decisions that have led to that, to get them to understand that actually there are political decisions that are made that affect the choices that are available to them, to get them to research and to understand the money that's going into their communities, to understand how charities are spending money, to ask questions of lottery. Well, one of our young people asked lottery recently, where are the most lottery tickets bought? Oh, is that where you spend the most money? I'll leave it there. But coming out of a 13-year-old's mouth, that's critical thinking. So we did a lot of that work with young people, getting them to really, really start understanding their lives and understanding society and feeling that they could play a part in shaping the society they wanted. And what we found was actually the adults could start moving to the back because the young people started taking the lead in the charity. And after we'd been running for about 7 years, winning awards, really exciting, great. A young person called Sinead came into my office one day and said, I want to speak on behalf of the young people, which is always troubling if you're the CEO of a children's charity. And she had fire burning in her eyes, and she said, this charity isn't working for us, it's working for you and the staff. And I was like, what do you mean? And she said, well, you put us on stage, you call us disadvantaged, we hate being called disadvantaged, how would you feel? The charity's tagline talks about disadvantage. You're getting money because people feel sorry for us, and then you're telling us we're leaders. But you're not telling people out there we're leaders, that's not how you're getting money for us. And she was like, you know, we love being here, we love this charity, but we don't like the way you talk about us, and it doesn't make us feel proud. That was a big moment for me because I knew she was right. And I took that to my trustees, some of whom were immensely challenged by that. One of my trustees at the time said, are we letting the kids run this thing now? I was like, shouldn't we be doing that? And we changed everything about the charity. We threw it all out. New strategy written with the young people. We asked the young people what they wanted to be called. We said, you know, we are in a poor area and you're not kids at Eton. And they said, we want to be called working class, but we want to kick the stigma out of being called working class. I was like, right, okay. And so all of a sudden our tagline changed and we became working class young people, being seen, being heard, leading change. When we did that, the switch in the young people was incredible. We started getting 100% attendance. They started wearing the t-shirts proudly. They wanted to represent. They held rallies because they felt all of a sudden this was something they had power in. And what happened with the adults is we started moving to the back because the young people were leading this thing genuinely. We've all seen youth-led work and youth consultations. This was genuine. When you've got hundreds of young people charging down the road in Manchester calling for social justice and the adults just trying to hold on to them, that's when I realised that we'd achieved what we wanted to achieve. I'm going to play you a short video now, just so you understand what I'm talking about and you hear it direct from the young people. This was a group of young people aged 13 and 14 years old. They did this themselves. Every word was written by them. They went and they researched this idea of leadership and disruption, because we talked about the fact that actually, if you work for, I don't know, Virgin, or if you work for a tech company and you're a disruptor, you're the god of that company. But if you're from a council estate in Stockport, not so much. And they said they wanted to be disruptive leaders. They didn't want to be more of the same. They didn't want to be the next Theresa May or Jeremy Corbyn. They wanted to be a disruptive leader because they thought the system wasn't working for them. And they made this video. I just want you to watch it.
There have been 73 Prime Ministers to date. 19 of those Prime Ministers have come from one institution, from Eton College. And 6 came from Harrow School, and another 6 came from Westminster School. All these schools charge £11,000, by the way, per term. In fact, only 7 of the 73 Prime Ministers went to a state school. And not one Prime Minister has come from Salford, Moorside, Stockport, Blakely, or Gorton. 41 Prime Ministers studied at Oxford or Cambridge. These institutions are dominated by privately educated people, despite only 7% of the population being privately educated. Seeing the theme here? It doesn't stop in the workplace either. Less able but wealthier young people are 35% more likely to become higher earners than bright but poor young people. Some employers at top companies use a poshness test when recruiting, discriminating against working class accents. and favoring well-spoken, well-traveled individuals instead. So, when the odds are never in your favor, what do? The word disrupt means to interrupt an event, activity, or process by causing a disturbance or problem. To be disruptive has two meanings. Firstly, it means to cause a disruption, to be troublesome, rowdy, undisciplined, attention-seeking, but there's also a second interpretation, innovative or groundbreaking, to be inventive, ingenious, original, unconventional, and fresh. Instead of simply serving the existing power structures without analysis, Reclaim encourages working-class young people to question, to challenge, and to shake up the status quo. After all, it's the current status quo that makes it so difficult for working-class people to enter into leadership positions in the first place. A disruptive leader thinks critically about the world around them in order to change it for the better. 19 Prime Ministers from Eton were going to change this.
So the young man who narrated that was 13 years old, and the oldest young person who worked on that was 14, and that was all their work. None of those kids are top-set young people, but they're passionate. So, moving on. Oh, I love what they did with that film as well. We had the Conservative Party conference in Manchester that year that they made the film. So the young people premiered it the night before and took their posters of themselves as disruptive leaders to the party conference, and it was just beautiful to see. Actually, some of the MPs actually interacted with them quite well. So I wanted to share this because this was one of their posters that they came up with. Again, this idea of understanding the history of Manchester, understanding working class heritage, but also being quite challenging and quite demanding, saying, don't forget about us when you're planning for your future. So a lot of our young people have really, their areas have really suffered because of gentrification in Manchester. So they've started learning about that and planning laws and all those different things. So we became incredibly proud of what our young people had achieved, and they felt that they owned the charity in some ways. They talked about being on Reclaim, and they used to say to each other, are you on it? Are you on Reclaim? It became a very cool thing. Everyone wanted to be part of the programme. They were quite exclusive as to who they would let in. They did a lot of the recruitment for us, which was fantastic. I saw on Twitter earlier that someone was talking, one of the speakers was talking about money versus mission, I think, this morning. And I had a slide that was about values versus value, because as I'm now at the stage where I'm reflecting back on things we've achieved at Reclaim, I'm also looking at maybe some of the mistakes that I made and we made. And one of them was, I think, about values and who we demand those values of. And this is quite a difficult message, but I realised that for my youth workers coming in, I would grill them, I would want to make sure that that golden thread of everything Reclaim believed, they had it running all the way through them. I did that with my staff team. What I found increasingly as I was constantly searching for money is that those who came in at this level, we didn't maybe run the same tests with them. When people talk about the great and the good, when people talk about, going out there and finding those people who can be the philanthropists who are going to fund your work, I now say to people, I implore with people who are starting small charities, make sure you're applying the same test to your trustees that you apply to every other member of staff. That golden thread should run through. And whether you've got an accountant or a lawyer or a Lord Lieutenant or whoever it is you've got sat around your trustee board, if they haven't got the same values that you espouse in your charity, then there is a problem. And I think sometimes the tension between trying to get the money and adhering to the mission can mean that we are not quite as tight in terms of looking up. And I also think that too many CEOs spend too much time having to chase that money. When I think of the hours that I've spent going to dinners where I hope that someone would have some money and give them to the charity, and I've got very little money in those situations. So I think there is something about really looking at the values of everyone who's involved in your charity, because that was something that I learned quite painfully a few times, and it was never the junior youth workers that were problematic. So, 5 minutes left. I'll end on a high note. Brexit night, I went to sleep. I thought that I knew what the result was going to be. I thought it was going to be a narrow victory for Remain. I lived in a very working class area of Stockport at the time. And I woke up in the morning and my neighbour, who'd never spoken to me ever, was singing a song at 5 or 6 in the morning. He was singing drunkenly. And I thought, something's happened. And then later on in the street, the men who lived in the house opposite, they were congering down the road. Like actually doing the conga and dancing down the road. And everyone was shouting Happy Independence Day, and it was like a street party on my street. And the reason and I'm sorry if you ever heard me speak before, because I have mentioned this before, but the reason I tell this story is because no one does. It's never on the news. It was the happiest day on my street ever. There was absolute jubilation. 3 days later, I was invited to a space very much like this. I was speaking. Richard Branson was there. It was, a really top business event. I was, charity thing at the end. And I mentioned some of the communities that I work in, and people had a lot to drink. And some of the businessmen at one of the tables started heckling me and talking about Northerners, and some people are too thick to vote, and they were so angry about what had happened, and they were so offensive about some of the communities that I work with. And this just really sat with me and really, really troubled me, because I felt like a lot of the communities that I care about and a lot of communities that I work in with good people who live there, who know nothing of spaces like this and know nothing of those businessmen who might be in Canary Wharf, but those people don't know anything of those people either. And I decided at that point that the best thing for me to do would be to leave my job, foolish, and see if I could start something called Roots. And Roots is about how do we get people in the UK to come together with curiosity and compassion and listen to each other with respect and genuinely hear what people are saying about their lives and about their communities, without one group feeling that they know better than the other group, without one group presuming that they can have lived their lives or walked in the footsteps of those people. How do we create safe spaces for people to talk to each other and to move closer together? My dad, he's already featured, but my dad, he used to kind of sit there and say, the British are very bad at difficult conversations. And it just feels that we're caught in this unending difficult conversation at the moment, and we're a nation that's not quite equipped to deal with that. So what we're doing with Roots is we're bringing together people who are from vastly different backgrounds to come with their families, to spend time in each other's houses, to cook together, to talk about some of the key issues, to meet each other's families, each other's children, to understand that actually there are massive differences, but there might be some similarities. And then, a month later, the other family invites them back. So we're having London influencers come, spend time in the Welsh Valleys, spend time in areas of Yorkshire, bring their families, see how those people choose to live their lives. Suspend judgment, just be quiet and listen and watch and see and maybe understand where choices have come from. But the important thing is, a month later, to be vulnerable and to invite those people back. Because I think as heads of organisations, quite often we're happy to go out and visit and see poverty and to visit our beneficiaries. But the idea of opening your own door and letting your own children meet those families, that's different. But it does feel like we're at a moment in this country where actually if we don't try and do something different and something radical, we're going to be stuck in this forever, and I can't bear it. These are just two of the quotes from a consultation that we ran recently. The first quote about, I don't care if it makes this country poorer, no one here is English anymore. That came back from someone in Portsmouth. If you've been to Portsmouth, there's lots of English people there. That's all I'm saying about Portsmouth. And the second one, that's not really helping. And that's emotion, and that's coming out on marches, and I understand where it's coming from, but that's not helping either. And that's all that's happening, is these things are clashing together. And I think Roots is all about us creating a safe space where people can actually come together, share their feelings, listen to each other, and understand a little bit better. I'm nearly out of time, so thanks for listening. I also want to say that I understand that this is ridiculously ambitious. Ridiculous. I'm a tired woman with MS in the north of England that's trying to solve Brexit. But you have to believe, right? You have to believe, and you have to start something. And movements, you've been talking about movement building. Movement building has to start with people who want to do things differently and believe that things can change. So I implore you all to have a conversation with someone that's very different to you. Don't shout at them and just listen to what they've got to say, because I think that's the way forward. And to end, my hero with a very wise thing to say. Thank you very much.